from simpleguitar.com here, and welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be talking about where did chords come from on the guitar and how do chords work, okay? But before we get going, today we're going to be talking about chords, what they are, where they come from, but I'm going to be talking about two things that you'll need to be a little bit familiar with before this video though. So if you aren't familiar with notes in music and how they relate to the guitar, I'll link to a video about that and you can go watch that now. Also, there's another video that I just recently did about scales and the major scale formula. That is one that you'll want to understand to get what we're talking about today as well. So I'll link to that one as well at the top here, and I'll put it down in the description of the video. So if you need to go watch those videos first and then come back to this one, it will be helpful and it'll be easier to understand this one too. So let's go ahead and we'll dive into talking about where do chords come from. So what the heck is a chord? Okay, most guitar players just think of chords like this. Okay, so these are just chord diagrams of a few different chords, but chords are like a block of notes like this, and if you play them right, they sound good, right? But that's not a complete definition of what chords are on guitar. So each of those chords are all made up of individual notes that a lot of the time guitar players totally ignore, or they aren't even aware about them. But what's better for you is to understand why those chords are chords, what makes them chords, where do they come from, and how do they work together. So that's what we're going to go over today. All right, so in the simplest definition, a chord is anytime you play three or more different notes together at the same time. That's it. That's all a chord really is three notes played together same time. So this can be really any three notes. You could play C, E, and G together. That's a chord. Or you could play A, B, and C together. That's also a chord. Or heck, you could even play C, C sharp, and D together. Even that's a chord, though most people would agree it doesn't sound any good, okay? So how do we know what chords sound good and what chords will sound good together? Let's explore that a bit. So where do we get chords? An easy way to build chords is to start with a scale like the major scale. Let's use the C major scale to look at this. So here we go. Here I've got two octaves of the C major scale. An octave is an interval or space between notes, okay? So when someone says an octave of a scale, like I just did, that means that you start on the root note of that scale and you go through all the notes of that scale until you get to that first note again. In this case, we're going from C to C, which would be one octave, and then we're going to C again. So we'd call that two octaves of this scale because we're going through all the notes of the scale twice. All right, so the most basic chords have only three notes and are called triads. We're going to use this C major scale to put together some basic triads and talk about how they're built so we can use formulas to find these kind of three-note chords in other places too. To start out though, we're going to begin with the C note, which is the root note for this scale. Then what we're going to do to build this chord is we're going to take every other note of the scale until we have three notes for our triad. So if we start on C, then we'll next grab E and then grab G, right? So let's hear those three notes together. This is how C, E, and G sound together. Not bad, right? So these are the notes that made up that chord, C, E, and G. C, E, and G are three notes that sound good when played together. So let's look really quick at the intervals or the distance between these notes, because if we understand those intervals, we can use that as a formula to create other chords that have the same sound quality as this chord, because the relationships between the notes will be the same. So here's our C major scale, and I put the distances between each note of the scale. If you remember from the video on the major scale formula, that should look familiar. So between C and E, we have two whole steps. Two whole steps is the same as four half steps. And then between E and G, we have a half step, to get up to F, and then a whole step to go from F to G. So that's 3 half steps. So between C and G, we have 3 whole steps and a half step, or a total of 7 half steps between those two notes. So we can name all of these intervals too. So the 4 half steps between C and E is called a major third interval. That's just what it's named. If you learn that name and you know if it's a major third, it's 4 half steps. Piece of cake. The 3 half steps between E and G is called a minor third interval. So same thing, you just got to learn the name and know that a minor third is 3 half steps. The 7 half steps between C and G is called a perfect fifth, or simply a fifth interval. Okay, so here we have our scale, and another way to label this is that C is the first note of the scale, E is the third note of the scale, and G is the fifth note of the scale. So let's listen to this chord again, and we're going to give a name to this chord. So here's C, E, and G together. Now, the quality or type of this chord is major. So this would be called a major chord. Since C is the root note of this chord, it's a C major chord. So if this is a major chord, that means that anytime we start on one note and we go up 4 half steps or a major third to the next note, and then up 3 more half steps or a minor third to the last note, you'll get a major chord no matter what note you start on. So whatever note you start on for the first note of the chord, we'll name it, but it will be a major chord if you follow that formula. So this gives us the major chord formula, and this is what it looks like. So we have the 1, or the first note of the chord, and then the 3, and then the 5. And between the 1 and the 3, we have 4 half steps or a major third. And between the 3 and the 5, we have 3 half steps or a minor third. The 1, the 3, and the 5 are in reference to these notes being the first, third, and fifth notes of a major scale. Now we can use this formula of 1, 3, 5 to find other major chords going forward. But major is not the only type of triad or chord that there is. There are 3 other basic triads. So let's see what else we can get when we use the C major scale to build some other chords with other notes. All right, so here's our scale again. Now we built our C major chord off of the C note and then taking every other note of the scale till we had 3 notes for our triad. But what if we start on another note of the scale? What kind of chord will we build then? So let's do this by starting on the second note of the scale, D. We're now going to have to think of D as the first note of this new chord. Then we'll skip E and grab F for the second note of the chord. Then we'll skip G and use A for the final note of our triad. Our new chord then is made up of the notes D, F, and A. So let's hear how those sound together, and then we'll look at the relationships or intervals between the notes to figure out what kind of chord this D chord is. So here's D, F, and A. And just to compare it, this is the C major chord that we just found. And then here's D, F, and A again. Okay, so for this chord, D is the first note, or the 1 of the chord. Then there's a whole step and half step between D and F. So that's 3 half step distance between those notes. And if you remember from the last time, that interval is called a minor third. So we have D as the 1 and F is the 3 so far. From F, we're going to go up 2 whole steps, which is 4 half steps, which is called a major third interval, to get A as the 5 of this chord. So the quality or type of this chord is minor. So this would be called a minor chord. And since D is the root note of this chord, it's a D minor chord. So if this is a minor chord, that means anytime we start on one note and go up 3 half steps or a minor third to the next note, and then up 4 more half steps or a major third to the last note, you'll get a minor chord. So whatever note you start on for the first note or the chord, we'll name it, but it will be a minor chord if you follow that formula every single time. So this is what the minor chord formula looks like. It's a 1, and then up 3 half steps or a minor third to a 3, and then up 4 half steps or a major third to the 5. But because this is based on what we found with the major chord formula, which was 1, 3, 5, right? But because when we go from D to F, it's only 3 half steps as opposed to the 4 half steps between C and E that we did with the major chord. That's why the 3 in the minor chord formula is flat. So our third note is 1 half step lower or flat from where it was in a major chord, okay? So the formula that you would say here for minor chord formula is 1, flat 3, and 5. So our major chord formula is 1, 3, 5, and our minor chord formula is 1, flat 3, and 5. So anytime a trio of notes fits this formula, you know that it's a minor chord. Now we have 2 of the 4 basic triads covered. Okay, so now let's go back to the C major scale and start with the third note of the scale, E, to see what kind of chord we can build from there. So now E is the first note of this new chord. So if we continue our pattern of every other note until we have 3, then we'll also grab G and B to make up this chord. So our new chord then is made up of the notes E, G, and B. So let's hear how those sound together, and let's compare it to how C major sounded and how the D minor chord sounded to see if it has a similar flavor to one of those chords. Then we'll take a look at the intervals that build this chord. So here's our C major right here. Here's the D minor that we just built. Now here's E, G, and B. Does it sound similar? Does it have a similar flavor to that C major or the D minor, right? Or is it totally different? So let's look at the intervals now. So now E is the 1 of the chord. Then there's a whole step and half step between E and G. So that's a minor third again, and that makes G the 3 of the chord. From G, we're going to go up 2 whole steps, which is a major third, to get B as the 5 of the chord. So that means we have E, and then we go up a minor third or 3 half steps to G, and then we go up a major third or 4 half steps to B. Well, that lines up with the minor chord formula, right? So that means that this chord is E minor. So far, we've made the chord C major, D minor, and now E minor from this scale. So let's keep going, but we're going to pick up the pace just a little bit now. All right, so we're back to our C major scale. And this time we're going to start with F, which is the 4th note of the scale. Starting from F, the other notes we'll need to build this chord are going to be A and C. So let's compare the sound of this F chord to the C major, D minor, and E minor that we have so far. Okay, and then while you're listening, I want you to think about if this chord will turn out to be a major chord, a minor chord, or something else. So here is the C major. Here's D minor. Here's E minor. And then here is F, A, and C played together. Now, let's check out the intervals between each note. All right, so there are 2 whole steps or 4 half between F and A to make a major third. Then between A and C, we have a half step followed by a whole step, so 3 half steps that makes up a minor third. If you thought this chord sounded more like C major, you'd be right, because this chord lines up with the major chord formula. And so that means this chord is F major. And that means so far we have C major, D minor, E minor, and F major now. Now let's keep going with the 5th note of the scale, G. So if we start on G, then we're going to skip to B and then to D. Pretty straightforward, right? You're getting used to this, right? Let's compare the sound of this G chord to C major, D minor, E minor, and F major that we have so far. And do you think that this chord will turn out to be a major chord, a minor chord, or something else? So here, This time I'll play this G chord first. This is the G chord. So that's G, B, and D together. Now here was your C chord. Here's D minor, E minor, F major, and here's your G chord. So do you think that's going to be a major chord or a minor chord, right? Let's check out the intervals between each note. There are 2 whole steps between G and B to make a major third. And then between B and D, we have a half step followed by a whole step, so 3 half steps that make up a minor third again. So that means that this chord lines up with the major chord formula. So this is officially G major. So that means we have C major, D minor, E minor, F, and G major now. So now that we're on to the 6th note of the scale to start on A. So from A, we'll skip to C and then to E. Okay, that's going to make up our triad. So here's how this A chord will sound compared to the other 5 chords that we have already. Okay, and once again, as you're listening, try to decide if this sounds like a major chord or a minor chord, or if it sounds like something totally different. Here's the A chord here. So that's A, C, and E. Now here's your C chord. Here's your D minor. Here's your E minor. Here's your F major. Here's your G major. And then here's this A chord. Okay, now let's look at the intervals. Between A and C, we have a whole step and half step, which is 3 half steps. So between A and C, we have a whole step and a half step, or 3 half steps for a minor third. Then between C and E, we have 2 whole steps, or 4 half steps, and that gives us a major third. So if we compare this to the major and minor chord formulas we have so far, this one lines up with the minor chord formula, making this chord A minor. Now we only have 1 more chord left to do, because then we'll be back to C where we started after that. Okay, so last note of the C major scale, let's go ahead and build this last chord starting on B. After B, we'll jump to D and then F. Here's how this chord will sound compared to the other chords we have already. So do your best to figure out by sound if this will be major, minor, or something else. So here's how that B chord will sound. So that's B, D, and F. Here's your C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and here's this B chord. Now let's check out the intervals between each note. So between B and D, we have a whole step and a half step, or 3 half steps for minor third. And then between D and F, we have another whole step and a half step, which is 3 half steps for another minor third. So the quality or type of this chord is diminished. So this would be called a diminished chord. Since B is the root of this chord, it's a B diminished chord. Okay, so here's what the formula for a diminished chord looks like. It's 1, flat 3, and then flat 5. Okay, because between the 1 and the 3, we only have 3 half steps or a minor third. That's going to give us the flat 3. And then from that note, we're going to go 3 half steps or a minor third to a flat 5. Because if you remember from the minor formula that we did, we had the flat 3, but then we went 4 half steps to the minor third, right? Or sorry, we went 4 half steps to the 5, but because we're going 3 half steps, that's one half step lower. So that's why it's a flat 5, because this formula is based on what we found for the major chord formula, which was 1, 3, 5. And you can also think of this as a minor chord with a flat 5th note. So now anytime 3 notes fit this formula, you know it's a diminished chord. And now we have 3 of the 4 basic triads covered. But today we're not going to cover that last basic triad because it's not going to appear in a major scale like we're talking about today. We will do that on another video. Now, check this out, the major key chord formula. So now we've built 7 chords in the key of C using the notes of the C major scale. And when we put them all together, these are the basic chords that are found in the key of C major. So we took these notes. This is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? And then these are the chords that we found. We have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and then B diminished. And then if I wanted to, I could go up one more for a higher C major right here. Since these chords are all built from the same scale, they're generally going to sound good together. Now, you can take any combination of these chords and start experimenting and finding combinations that you like. But here's the big kicker. Just like we have a formula for the major scale that we can use to find any major scale. And then today we discovered formulas for major chords, minor chords, and diminished chords. This set of chords is itself another formula that you can use to find what chords are in any given major key. That way you can know really quickly what chords are going to work together well. To do that, we're going to think of these chords not just by their name and type, but by their function within the key. So each of these 7 chords fills a particular function within the key, and that might sound complicated now, but it's not. So let's break that down. The function of these chords is pretty simple to begin with. We're just going to number each chord in relation to its order within the scale of the key. So since C is the first note of the scale, C major is the first chord, which we usually just call 1 or the 1, okay? Same with D minor. Since D is the second note of the scale, then D minor is the second chord or the 2. E minor then is the third chord, and so on and so forth. Here it is all together. So I put the function of each chord above the actual chord name here. So we have C major under 1, D minor under 2, E minor under 3, F major under 4, G major under 5, A minor under 6, and B diminished under the 7. So now we're going to assign the chord type or quality with each chord position in the key. So in the 1 position, we have a major chord. In the 2, there's a minor chord. The 3 is a minor chord. The 4 is major. The 5 is also major. And then we have another minor chord with the 6. And the diminished chord wraps it all up with 7. So here's the formula all laid out. So the first chord in a major key is major. The second chord is minor. The third chord is minor. The fourth chord is major. The fifth chord is major. The sixth chord is minor. And the 7th chord is diminished. So our formula for the 7 basic chords in any major key is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. That's the formula. So if you can memorize major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, that's the formula to understand what chords are in any major key. Another way to memorize this is to think that within any major key, the 1, 4, and 5 are major chords. The 2, 3, and 6 are minor chords, and the 7 is diminished. Sometimes it helps people to think of it in those 3 different groups. 1, 4, and 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and then the 7 is diminished. But since this is a formula, let's go ahead and look at how we can find the chords in another key. So here's the notes of the A major scale. So we have A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, okay? Now here's our major key chord formula. Major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. So these are the kind of chords that we would build on top of the notes of the scale. So let's combine the notes of the scale with the chord types in the corresponding position to find the chords that are in A major. So we'll have A major as the first chord, B minor is the second chord, C sharp minor is the third chord, D major is the fourth, E major is the fifth, F sharp minor is the sixth, and then G sharp diminished is the seventh chord. And that's all 7 basic chords in A major. Let's go back for a second to the beginning when I showed you the chord diagrams of some chords, and let's show you how the notes that make up the chords we found actually fit those chords. So with this C major chord here, let's put the notes that are actually being played on each string down below the string. Remember, we figured out earlier that a C major chord is made up of C, E, and G. So these are the notes that you're playing. On your 5th string, you're playing C. On your 4th string, you're playing an E note. Your 3rd string is a G. Your 2nd string is a C. And then your 1st string is E. Now with this G major, let's outline where the G, B, and D notes are that make up the chord, right? So we have G on the 6th string, B on the 5th string, D on the 4th string, another G on the 3rd string, another B on the 2nd string, and then a third G on this 1st string. So you see how even though with these chords we're playing 5 or 6 strings, we're only really playing 3 notes. And there are actually lots of ways to play chords all over the fretboard, and I'll go over those in other videos. But this should help you start to see the basic open chords that everyone plays a bit differently and change how you approach chords just a little bit. So let's do a quick review of what we covered today. First of all, chords are made up of any 3 notes played together. And using a scale like the major scale, you can build chords that are naturally going to sound good together. We can use formulas to build different kinds of chords, like the major chord formula, which is made up of the 1st, the 3rd, and the 5th note of the scale. So between the 1 and the 3, we have 4 half steps or a major third, and between the 3 and the 5, we have 3 half steps or a minor third. Then we have the minor chord formula, which is 1 flat 3, 5. So between the 1 and the flat 3, we have 3 half steps or a minor third. And between the flat 3 and the 5, we have 4 half steps or a major third. And then the diminished chord formula is 1 flat 3, flat 5. So we have 3 half steps or a minor third between the 1 and the flat 3. And then between the flat 3 and the flat 5, we have 3 half steps for another minor third. And we can also use a formula to find what chords are in any given key as long as you know the notes of the major scale you're using. And that gives us the major key chord formula, which is major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. Or you can think of it as the 1, the 4, and the 5 are major, the 2, the 3, and the 6 are minor, and the 7 is diminished, right? So that's it, guys. That is where chords come from, and some of the basics of how we build these chords, how we use these chords, how these chords work together. And so I hope that that clears up a little bit of confusion and gives you more of a foundation of understanding these chords and how they work together. Because this is stuff that like I didn't know for a long time, but when I go over this with students, they're always like, wow, that makes it so much simpler. Because before, it seems like finding chords that sound together is like this mystical, difficult thing, and you have to search because we have so many options on the guitar, right? But really, we can break stuff down into these cool little formulas, and then we can use those formulas to recreate the same type of sounds that we've heard before. And so it makes it really, really handy. So I hope that that was helpful for you guys. If you have any questions, still go ahead and comment down below the video. Ask your questions. I'll get down there and help you out. If I need to make future videos about stuff answering things, I'll do that. That's not a problem. But I hope that this helped. I hope that this made it simple for you, and I hope that it was useful for you. Now, on top of that, guys, I do have a gift for you at my website if you do not already have it. This is the guide on the top 10 things to learn on guitar first, which is totally free for you. You just go to my website, go to simpleguitar.com/top10, download the guide, have fun with it. It's got 10 things in there that I like to teach students all the time when they're starting out playing to get them the most bang for their buck when they're playing guitar, because I like to get them doing musical, fun stuff right off the bat, not playing stuff like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and Ode to Joy and stuff like that. I like to get them playing real music and having fun. And the things in that guide are 10 of the things that I like to get people going on that will get you a lot of musical progress right away instead of spending a whole bunch of time wasted, trying to practice exercises before you ever play anything musical. So go to the website, download that guide, have fun with it, and then I will catch you guys in the next video.